questions. First, Mr. Miller and Mr. Shulman. Essentially, it's my understanding that the IRS headquarters shut down the use of political terms such as Tea Party and other terms we've all learned about in June of 2011. That's when headquarters shut that down. Why weren't people then fired or transferred? More significant action taken than just told, don't do this, given how outrageous this conduct is. Why wasn't more definitive action taken?
I don't believe that I was aware at the time that had happened. I first became aware of this in May of 2012.
Mr. Shulman, you were around during this time?
Yeah, in June of 2011, I don't believe I was aware of this, actually.
Well, who was aware? Somebody at headquarters was aware, obviously, but besides Lois Lerner.
Well, the report indicates that exempt organizations knew. There's no indication, I think, from the report, and you'd have to ask the Inspector General that others knew at this time.
Well, sorry. Well, you're acting, head of the IRS. You were the head of IRS, and Shulman. Well, who did know? I mean, come on. You've read the report. You were acting commissioner. You were commissioner. Come on. If you don't know, it sounds like somebody's not doing his job. So why wasn't more direct action taken first, when these terms were discovered right away, and then had a second chance. IRS had a second chance after the same activity started again in January 2012. Incredibly, started again. IRS stopped for a while, then went back again. Old habits. I can't believe that, frankly. Why wasn't more firm action taken by people, either the commissioner himself or by people at the top? It's outrageous. Any person can figure out that this is unacceptable conduct. Mr. Miller?
Again, sir, all I can say is we were unaware. I was unaware, I believe, at the time that it had happened. When I found out in May, I took action.
But what action did you take?
So I was briefed on, after sending a group to take a look at the cases in May. They reported back to me in May of 2012, essentially which much of what had transpired and what is shown in the IG report, that the cases were languishing, that a list had been utilized, that letters had gone out that were much more broad than they should be. At that point, we had already taken care of the letters because those had come up, and this is how we knew something was going on, and I asked for a review. We then trained our folks. We held workshops to ensure that they were going to do their work well. We took a look at the cases. I asked for the cases to be looked at and grouped in a fashion that those that looked like they should be approved were approved. Those that looked like they needed some work got that work, and those that needed further development got that development. So we took action on that. I also, at that time, I was aware that TIGTA was working on this, but I took some intermediate action pending TIGTA. We transferred and reassigned an individual who had been involved in the letters, and I asked that the person who I believed at the time was responsible for the listing, that oral counseling occur. At that time, the listing process had...
All right, I appreciate that, and this committee has sent many questions to you and Mr. Shulman and others to try to get the answer to some of these questions, and we're not going to get the definitive answers at this moment, that's clear. A deeper question to me is, how did this culture, what created this culture of indifference to the American people and of such aggressive behavior, so improperly targeting certain groups? What caused that culture to develop? And what did you do about correcting that culture, if you were aware of it? Either one of you, Mr. Miller or Mr. Shulman. I'll start with you, Mr. Shulman.
Sure. During my time at the IRS, I believed and I articulated that the IRS needed to be a non-political, non-partisan.
We may have articulated that,
agency.
how this happened.
I think that there's a set of rules built in to the system. There's laws, there's education of people that I think the vast majority of the IRS employees understand that and
What
abide
happened in
with that.
Cincinnati? What conditions caused that? Because my time's expiring here. It already has expired, frankly. If you could just very quickly, in a nutshell, bottom line, how did this happen?
Mr. Chairman, I can't say that I know that answer.
Well, you're a commissioner.
I'm 6 months out of.
You got some sense of the outfit. You're a commissioner for a good number of years. You got some idea. You thought about this.
I'm 6 months out of office. When I left, the IG was looking into this to gather all of the facts. I've now had the benefit of reading the report, and that's the full accounting of facts that I have at this point. And so I don't think I can answer that question.
I'm kind of disappointed, frankly, because you've had time to think about this, and you certainly have more thoughts than that. Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On two different occasions, my colleagues and I wrote letters to you, Mr. Schulman. In the first letter on March 14th, 2012, we asked about selective enforcement by the IRS and requests for donor information. Then we wrote again on June 18th, 2012, to request more information about the IRS's practice of requesting confidential donor information. As I wrote in my March 2012 letter, quote, "It is critical that the public have confidence that federal tax compliance efforts are pursued in a fair, even-handed, and transparent manner without regard to politics of any kind," unquote. The responses that I received from the IRS were anything but transparent. The IRS responded to these two letters on April 26, 2012 and September 11, 2012, and both of these responses were signed by you, Mr. Miller. These responses did not disclose that the IRS had any reason to believe that it had improperly targeted Tea Party or other conservative organizations, or improperly asked for confidential donor lists. I ask unanimous consent to put all four letters in the record at this point.
Without objection.
Recently, we have learned that the IRS was in fact aware that the IRS had targeted Tea Party and other conservative organizations. We know that by June 2011, at the latest, Lois Lerner, the director of the Exempt Organizations Group in D.C., was aware that IRS examiners had issued a, quote, "be on the lookout," unquote, listing regarding Tea Party and other organizations. We also know that on May 30th, 2012, TIGTA briefed you, Mr. Schulman, about its ongoing audit of these practices. Yet when you testified before Congress on March 22nd, 2012, you said, quote, "there was absolutely no targeting," unquote. To this day, you have not corrected your testimony, even though you know that the IRS was inappropriately screening Tea Party organizations. Now, Mr. Schulman, why have you not come forward before today to correct the record and acknowledge that there was, in fact, inappropriate screening occurring in the IRS, the organization that you headed?
Let me answer a few things. One is the full set of facts around these circumstances came out last week in the TIGTA report, which I read. Until that point, I did not have a full set of facts about.
Yeah, but you knew this was going on. Why didn't you let us know when that's what we were inquiring about when we sent these letters to you?
What I knew was not the full set of facts in this report. What I knew sometime in the spring of 2012 was that there was a list, it was being used. Knew that the word Tea Party was on the list. Didn't know what other words were on the list. Didn't know the scope and severity of this. Didn't know if groups that were pulled in were groups that would have been pulled in anyway.
But you knew
and I took what I thought at the time, and I think now, was the proper step when a concern is brought to the Commissioner of Internal Revenue Service, which is to make sure that the matter is being looked at by the Inspector General.
But we sent you letters inquiring about this with a number of senators on those letters. And you should have corrected the record. And you should have done it long before today. And that's the point I'm making. Mr. Miller, your signature's on both of the responses that I received from the IRS. Nowhere in your responses did you indicate that you knew the IRS was improperly selecting Tea Party organizations for extra scrutiny. Nowhere in your responses did you indicate that you knew the IRS was asking improper questions about donor contributions. You just sat on that guilty knowledge. Mr. George stated that he briefed you on May 3rd, 2012 about TIGTA's audit, so we know you were aware of it at the time that you responded to my second letter, if not both letters. But you didn't mention any of this in your responses to me, to the Senate, or to any other congressional body. Now, Mr. Miller, that's a lie by omission. There's no question about that in my mind. It's a lie by omission. And you kept it from people who have the obligation to oversee this matter. On Friday, you swore under oath that you had told the truth in your prior responses. You said that the IRS had been guilty of, quote, horrible customer service, unquote. Mr. Miller, what we have learned about the IRS in recent days goes far beyond horrible customer service. Why did you mislead me and my colleagues, my fellow senators, and most importantly, the American people, by failing to tell us what you knew about the exact subject we were asking about? Why didn't you tell us?
Mr. Hatch, I did not lie.
You what?
I did not lie, sir.
You lied by
I
omission.
answered those questions.
You knew what was going on. You didn't, and you knew that we had asked. You should have told us.
I answered the questions. I answered them truthfully. Did I know about the list? Yes. Not on the first letter, by the way, because the timing, I wouldn't have known for that. On the second letter, we answered those questions, sir. Frankly, the concept of political motivation here, I did not agree with that in May. I do not agree with that now. We were not politically motivated in targeting conservative groups. That's borne out by Mr. George's report.
What else could you call it? He just said he hadn't found that up till now. And today's statement was a little more definitive than the one he gave to the House. Now, let me just say this. You knew this was going on. You knew we were concerned. You knew we'd written to you. You had our letters. Why didn't you correct the record? Why didn't you let us know? We would have solved this problem a long time ago.
TIGTA was looking at the cases, sir. And
So
TIGTA was doing
was TIGTA's responsibility, or was it yours?
I'm sorry?
The commissioner relied on you to answer our letters. Why didn't you answer them? And why didn't you tell us this information that you knew, at least on the second?
I believe I did answer them, and I did answer them truthfully, sir.
Thank you, Senator Hatch. Next is, we're going down the list. Senator Stabenow.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is an incredibly important hearing. And let me just say, as we heard Mr. Miller, you're saying this was a mistake. We would suggest extremely serious mistake, and Mr. George says gross mismanagement. What I don't understand is how, again, something could start in 2010. It was not until June of 2011 that the director of the exempt organizations learned of the practice. It wasn't until January of 2012, 7 months later, that they set up new criteria, which was still inappropriate after they'd been told to change it. And it wasn't until 4 months after that that the Cincinnati office finally started doing the right criteria. And so both for Mr. Shulman and Mr. Miller, it took almost 2 years for the IRS to finally fix the problem, including 11 months after it came to the attention of the division head. How in the world could it take so long for senior people at the IRS to find the problem, fix the problem, and was there no ongoing oversight of the employees in Cincinnati and what they were doing? Mr. Shulman, let me start with you.
Again, I'm not there to go ask a set of questions of people, what happened, when, who, and how.
With all due respect, you were there, though.
No, I was there, but since this all came to light and the full set of facts are there, I haven't been able to be back there talking with people doing things. So let me just answer your question.
But why didn't you know when you were there?
I agree that this is an issue that when someone spotted it, they should have run up the chain, and they didn't. And why they didn't, I don't know.
Mr. Miller?
So I would agree. I'm not going to disagree at all with your characterization of bad management here, because I think that did happen. And I don't want to understate concerns with the list, because we should not have done that. We simply should not have done that. We should be looking at the file. We should be looking at the facts. We should not look at names. We should not look at the positions taken on a given topic in terms of how we pull people into full development of these cases. But it was not elevated. We did not know.
Mr. George, could you speak more about the management, what your review has revealed about the IRS management? How was that breakdown possible given the management structure? And has the IRS done anything to make the unacceptable actions like this less likely in the future?
While we have not yet completed our analysis of their response to our recommendations, we do intend to do so in the future. So, Senator, I'll be able to respond in full once we've completed that review. It is worth noting that the determinations unit in Cincinnati did seek clarification from their headquarters unit in Washington, and it took almost a year before a response was received by them to their request on how to handle some of these issues. And the bottom line, Senator, it was just, again, a breakdown in communications, a mismanagement on the part of the Internal Revenue Service.
It does sound, though, that the first clarification they received, they took that back and then they changed again and did something inappropriately.
Well, there were two aspects of it. They sought clarification initially, had not received an answer, eventually did get direction from Ms. Lerner to change the way they were acting, and then on their own decided to revert to a different, slightly different, yet still inappropriate way of handling these matters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Grassley.
I'm going to direct my question, or at least the first one, to Mr. Schulman, Mr. Miller. Now, this comes directly from Iowa. One of my constituents attempted to establish 501c3 charity called Coalition for Life of Iowa. She told my staff that an IRS agent told her, quote, "Your application's ready to go. However, it will not be approved until you send a letter signed by your entire board under penalty of perjury saying that you will not protest at Planned Parenthood." End of quote. Now that's outrageous that statement would be even made by anybody in government, that somehow you got to compromise your First Amendment rights. She also received a letter from the IRS asking several invasive questions, including the details of the group's prayer meeting. Now, stop to think about the government getting involved in somebody having a prayer meeting. It appears that the IRS essentially offered this group a quid pro quo. You can become a charity if you don't protest in front of a Planned Parenthood, generally speaking, so you don't have to worry about 6103. Is it appropriate even for an IRS employee to offer a quid pro quo in the example like this? Mr. Miller or Mr. Schulman, either one of you.
The answer is no. I mean, we shouldn't be trading.
Okay, then let's move on. That's a good answer, because that's the answer you ought to give. But how on earth could you let something like this happen under your leadership? And do either of you feel any responsibility or remorse for treating an American citizen this way?
I think I started my public statement with an apology, sir, and I would continue that. I don't know what happened in your given case. And as you well are aware, I can't speak to it under the 6103 rules. But I do apologize for the treatment of folks. And look, there are two things that happened with these cases. First was the selection, and the selection criteria was bad. Second was their treatment once they were in that group. And that too was bad, sir. It was. I don't know whether this particular organization was inside or outside of that group, but the service